Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Shadowtalk. My name is Bull, and this week I want to talk a little bit about the man who taught me Shadowrun. Taught me everything I know, taught me everything how to be a game master, and is directly, indirectly responsible for me becoming a gamer in the first place. I've kind of mentioned this, I think, in another video I did. But I got introduced to gaming in elementary school during an indoor recess. It was raining outside. We had recess inside instead. And one of the kids in my class, Matt, had brought in a D&D set. One of the old Moldvay sets, the basic box set. And he had played some with his older brother, and who later became my GM, Stephen A. Tinner. GM to the stars, evil GM, and occasionally known as a player as Mako the Shark Shaman, and a lot of other characters. But his most recent, the ones he played most recently were Mako the Shark Shaman and Johnny Banger the Rocker. Unfortunately, Steve passed away. It'll be 2 years ago now. I think yesterday was the anniversary, and it's still really difficult because he was one of my best friends for a very long time, and as I said, he had an amazingly profound impact on my life. Because as I was saying, in elementary school, one kid I went to school with, Matt, brought in the D&D set, and he had been playing with his older brother and Tinner. And then later on, when I was in junior high school, I didn't play with Tinner, but I went to the same, because Steve was 4 years older than I was. And at that age, that makes a big difference, because you're not in the same class, not in the same school even. And so you don't get to spend a lot of time with the person unless you're directly involved with them and their family somehow. I went to church with his family. In fact, his parents would pick me and my brother and sometimes my cousins up and take us with them. They had a van, and they would haul all of us kids off to church, and that was cool. But on the way to school and on the way back, I would hear stories from Steve's younger brother Ken, Matt, and a few of the other guys that I went to school with, who were closer to my age. I would hear stories from them about the games they played, and combined with getting introduced to D&D, that got me into gaming. I went from D&D to Marvel Superheroes and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness, Heroes Unlimited, and then eventually started branching out on my own a little bit more. And then around the end of high school, when I went to college, Tinner introduced me to... I actually started playing with Tinner on a regular basis, and that's when they introduced me to Shadowrun and got me involved there. He was a fantastic GM. He taught us a lot of really good stuff. And I will say this with a caveat. I have some rules that I use when I GM, and these are all things that Steve would say that Steve taught me. But the caveat is that you need to have trust in your players, and you need to have trust in your GM for these to work. I always took it for granted that groups would trust each other, and I actually was kind of shocked when I got online and I started talking, especially in recent years. It wasn't such a big deal back in the day. I think it's become more and more of a thing, especially as more games have started becoming more and more designed to encourage player autonomy. You know, things like having action point systems and or some sort of points that allow you to, like story points or whatever, where you can actually change the story and stuff. And I think that's changed the way a lot of gamers play and a lot of gamers think. I've also found that turns out that there's an awful lot of just jerks that are playing and game mastering. There's a lot of power abuse and such. So groups don't, and people don't always play with friends, which I find really strange. Everybody I've ever gamed with, I considered a pretty good friend of mine, one way or another, or at least a friend of a friend. There was occasionally some folks that I gamed with that I wasn't close with, but you know, at the end of the day, you sat at my gaming table, you're a friend. I'm finding that there's a lot of groups that they're not friends, which strikes me as weird and odd and whatever, but what can you do, huh? So, the thing Steve taught me, and like I said, this was when I was trying to learn to GM, basically. I mean, I GM D&D and whatever, but to me, D&D's relatively easy because D&D is a dungeon crawler. I always looked at it like that. We played it as a hack and slash type game, you know. D&D was more about making maps and statting out monsters and putting loot tables in, and less about roleplay and whatever else. There was always a little bit of that, but it was always much more freeform. When I started playing Shadowrun and other games, that's when we started having a lot more focus on character and stuff. But that said, so when I wanted to start GMing Shadowrun, there were things that he told me, taught me, showed me through example and stuff. And so there was basically 3 rules for his game mastering. Rule number 1, dice are for sound effect only. And basically what that meant was that, and I may have covered some of these before, but dice are for sound effect only basically means you don't, as a game master, you don't let the dice dictate the story. You still use the dice for all the random stuff and everything, but you don't let a bad roll completely derail the game. I mean, that's just silly. And conversely, you know, so you want to set a certain tempo for the story as a game master. You're the storyteller. White Wolf had it as the storyteller, and that's very, very true. You want to be setting the tempo, setting the pace of the story, and you want to be telling a story, and the players are experiencing that story. They're affecting that story, they're interacting with that story, but the story still plays out. So you don't allow dice to completely screw up your story. So when necessary, you fudge rolls. It's just, like I said, it was just how he rolled, and it worked out well. And again, you have to trust your group. You have to trust your game master. You have to trust that he's not screwing you or favoring certain players over others or whatever when you're doing this. Rule number 2 was, in my world, the jets fly backwards. And basically what this meant was that, again, story trumped everything. The game master's job is to tell an entertaining story and to engage the players in an entertaining way. This means that sometimes you have to do things for story purposes. You ever been watching a TV show? There's a common trope name for it, idiot ball. That's one. There's other trope names as well. But you ever watching a TV show or a movie, and characters just do something that is just so outrageously dumb, or so, you're like, why are they doing that? Or things just happen for that are just, they stretch your belief. Or things just don't work the way they should. The laws of physics are a little bit suspended. And those are done to advance the story. You can't advance the story if the prime character doesn't act like an idiot occasionally. You can't advance the story if every time somebody gets punched, they suffer a massive concussion and a broken jaw, and and the guy doing the punching breaks his hand. realism needs to sometimes get thrown out the window in favor of the story. And that's what the Jets Fly Backwards means, is because sometimes, basically in Steve's game world, things didn't always necessarily work the same way they do in our world when it was story appropriate. And then finally, the last one that he would say was, put on a good show and fates will smile. And this was because sometimes players had skills that they didn't, in real life, really know how to use. Characters had skills, I should say. This was especially true of things like negotiations and the social characters. You know, how often have you sat down at a table and somebody wanted to play the face, or the smooth-talking character, or the seductress? And let's face it, as a player, they weren't exactly very charming or very seductive or able to really handle doing the fast-talking aspect of what is needed to be a con man. I suffer from that myself. I'm good at babbling, but I'm not so good at the smooth-talking stuff, as you can probably tell from watching these videos. So, the idea of put on a good show and fate will smile was basically try your best. Do your best. And occasionally do something stupid. It was more entertaining. You know, basically, Tinner's idea was be entertaining. And sometimes, you know, yes, you know, you're trying to jump that motorcycle over 32 cars while escaping, you know, an explosion. Normally that would be, you know, the massive dice penalty or whatever to your test, or would have this really ridiculous success number you needed to hit. But because it was very story appropriate and because it was very dramatic and you were attempting it with good faith, maybe you would get bonuses to your rolls, or that target number would come down a little bit, or whatever. Something would happen and maybe give you a little bit of an edge. Likewise, if you didn't necessarily have the skill, you just had to try. Do your best to attempt to do the seduction role, to do the actual seduction as the role play. I mean, you know, don't get weird about it, but you make the attempt. You make the fast talk attempt. You basically tell them what you're trying to do before you do the role. You just don't rely on the role. And that's basically what that meant. And then, of course, there were others. There were other things that he would say occasionally that would have an impact on the game. A big one was how he treated the players. He was very firmly, and I agree with this, after years of playing with him, I very much agree with this, but he was very much of the opinion that players who are kept poor, and who are kept desperate, and who are kept hungry, make better players. You don't let the players get too comfortable, too complacent. So, you know, it's like, for example, Bull the Orc Decker. Bull the Orc Decker spent an awful lot of time replacing things. Vans. At one point I wanted to become a rigger. I wanted to try out the rigging rules. We didn't have a rigger in the group because it was mainly a two-man group. It was Johnny 99, who was a coyote shaman / swordsman, and there was Bull, who was a decker with a big gun. So at some point I tried to do a little bit of rigging, because, you know, rigging and decking kind of always went a little hand in hand to a certain degree. And to do the rigging, I decided I was going to get a Bulldog step van. I had a Bulldog step van. I decided I was going to trick that van out. Armor, machine guns, the works. And this was back during early second edition, and it was the Rigger Black Book. And the Rigger Black Book and doing modifications was a nightmare. It was a lot of math, and it was a big pain in the ass, and it took forever to do. So I built my van, and within a few game sessions, the van got blown up by a dragon. During the first Mercurial adventure, if by any chance you've played that. Perry Anwar, who ended up eventually playing a very large part in our campaign, as Perry and Kyle Morgan became recurring antagonists, we'll say. But yeah, Perry blew up the van once. It got destroyed 3, 4, 5 times, I think, over the course of the campaign. Bull's arm. He had one arm that he just had a penchant for losing. It would get ripped off, bitten off, blown off, you name it, it happened. So we were constantly, anytime we made a decent amount of money, we were usually funneling it back through. And then eventually, obviously as a campaign goes on, eventually the characters have to start building up wealth. So eventually you let them start building up stuff. Of course, then you ramp up the opposition more, but you don't keep them poor forever, but you can do that for quite a long while. The other thing the tenor would say was that if you kill them, the fun is over. So this wasn't to say that Tenor wouldn't kill a character, but usually if a character died during one of Tenor's games, it was usually due to their own actions, rather than bad dice rolls or the game master being devious and evil. So no matter what kind of craziness we got ourselves into, we didn't usually find ourselves at death's door. Hold on. So I love talking about old games, but it's really hard talking about him sometimes anymore. So I apologize. I'm a little scattered about it. I miss him quite a bit. He was a good friend, and he's the reason I am who I am today. Honestly, everything. I can blame him. So, anyways, where was I? Game stuff. Yeah, the thing about game mastering that Tenor taught me was basically be rough, be firm, but always reward the players in the end. But you don't coddle them. Don't give them things. Just don't hand them things. Things should never be easy. If you don't earn it, you don't respect it, you don't treasure it. It doesn't become a valuable memory. It just becomes a laundry list of things that you were handed. And it's like going back. My memories of our old campaign, I don't remember the adventures that went completely smooth, to be completely honest. The ones I remember are things like, what was it? Divided Assets, I think it was, we played through. It was one of the modules. And I believe it was the one that took us to Denver, which I think was Divided Assets. And at the end of the adventure, Tenor basically said, "Here, let me show you something. See this first chapter? See this last chapter? Those are the only 2 chapters of this book I ended up using." Because apparently we took the job at the beginning of the adventure during the first chapter, and then we went completely 90 degrees away from the adventure, found our own path all the way towards the end, and then eventually looped back around towards where the adventure ended. So we were all over the place, except for where the adventure was written, and no matter what he did, he couldn't steer us back in. So eventually he just sort of leaned into it and ran with it, but we completely screwed that one all up. Like I said, the instances with Bull's van, the instances with Bull's arm, the attempts at framing Perry and Kyle for siphoning funds from As Technology to get them off our back. Yeah, that didn't work so well. That was one of those many times Bull learned he wasn't nearly as clever and as good at decking as he thought he was. But just, yeah. So yeah, that's I think that's going to be my Shadow Talk for today. We're hitting the 20-minute mark almost. So that's been long enough of me babbling at you. I know that there's been a few tributes put into adventures and mod books since. So I just, raise a glass, a virtual glass, in Steve's memory. If you think about it, even if you've never met him, even if you never played with him, even if you never heard of him before today, know that he had a very big impact on a lot of people's games, a lot of people's lives. He had an enormous impact on my life, and at least through me had an impact on the actual world of Shadowrun, which I know always kind of tickled him a bit, because he was such a huge fan of the game world. So, alright, well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this. If you like the video, please click like, subscribe to the channel. I have a Patreon down below. There's a Patreon down below. There we go. Camera's a little funky. It's hard to spatially coordinate. There's a link down below. Click my Patreon and consider supporting me to see more videos like this, my Bulldreks, my Let's Plays, and I also do writing, fiction, game rules, and stuff like that occasionally, and those are all made available to my Patreon backers as well. So if you're interested in any of that sort of thing, please feel free to check it out. Alright, thanks a lot. Have a good one, and Steve, just know that we still miss you here, man. Hopefully, so wherever you're in, you're still rolling the dice and having a great time. Take it easy.